Welcome to the Sega Sophomore slump. It's Segaiden episode 59.
Oh no, now I really am finished.
Who's that?
Just one of my oldest enemies.
1988 was the year of twos for Master System. Follow-ups to earlier games for the console appeared in rapid succession as spring rolled lazily into summer. Sadly, these second games were generally not as good as their predecessors, as we see here with Space Harrier 3D. This one should have been a knockout, a pure, simple, effortless success. And yet, it should have been a big deal, too. As I've mentioned before, Sega often treats Space Harrier as a critical starting point for the company. Although the game didn't introduce the concept of superscalar graphics, having been preceded by Hang-On, Space Harrier greatly improved on the concepts that Hang-On introduced. It added an additional axis of movement to the action, and presented players with a distinct psychedelic visual style that felt like a living progressive rock album cover. Along with Outrun, Space Harrier did more to set the tone for Sega in the back half of the 1980s than any other single title. Its fast-paced action, gripping music, sampled audio snippets, and eye-watering scaling effects made for a game that felt literally years ahead of anything else on the market. For the game's initial home release, Sega pushed the Master System to its limits. The 8-bit console obviously couldn't recreate the visual effects of an arcade cabinet powered by the same processors as graphical computing powerhouses like the Apple Macintosh and Commodore Amiga, which cost tens of times more than the Master System hardware. But it managed to fake the experience to a satisfactory degree by dedicating the console's sprites to the player's enormous on-screen avatar, while rendering enemies, scenery, and projectiles as animated background tiles. Space Harrier 3D attempts to bring the console experience a little closer to arcades by making use of the Sega 3D glasses. The idea clearly was that the console's shortcomings would be balanced out by the integration of 3D visualization that would enhance the sense of visual depth while giving players crucial information about the spatial relationships and distances of objects that tended to be muddled by the use of blocky, visually conflicted background tiles to render just about everything in the game. But that's kind of burying the lead. Space Harrier 3D is not simply Space Harrier with the addition of a glasses-enhanced 3D effect. For all intents and purposes, it's a genuine sequel to Space Harrier, an all-new set of levels, enemies, and challenges. Mechanically, Space Harrier 3D does literally nothing new. You control the eponymous Harrier as he runs, flies, and shoots across checkerboard landscapes on alien worlds. You can move in all directions around the screen as the action moves rapidly forward into the horizon, which somehow never seems to move any closer. However, plenty of things in the middle distance do streak towards you as you dash forward, both landscape elements and enemy aggressors alike. You can tell they're enemies because the alien craft in this game swipe their designs from popular sci-fi properties, like the fighter craft, that are just different enough from Star Wars Imperial TIE fighters to avoid legal action. The terrestrial objects hurtle forward, looming ever larger as you race ahead, with small destructible obstacles threatening to trip you up and larger indestructible hazards killing you on contact. Unlike in the first game, some hazards now appear from above in addition to rising from the ground, but you need to avoid them all the same. The screen does offer a very limited amount of panning left and right so that you can veer around these objects, but otherwise it's business as usual. The biggest danger in Space Harrier 3D comes from enemy ships and monsters, and not just because they fire projectiles at you. It's more about the way their projectiles work. Due to the game's reliance on background tiles, there's a sort of object priority given to graphical elements. Because objects are represented by background tiles, they appear inside of a square space that overwrites anything that's meant to be further away. The Master System lacks the ability to sandwich multiple background layers on top of each other, and the cartridge simply doesn't contain enough storage space to draw objects at different distances with fragments of other objects peering out from around the edges. An absolutely unreasonable task given the different combinations of objects and projectiles involved. So all objects are simply bordered by a frame of blank color that blots out anything behind it. This means that once projectiles start flying fast and furiously, you start to lose lots of crucial visual details. As a bullet flies toward you, the blank frame around its edges often overwrites dangerous background and alien elements that will potentially crash into you. Projectiles generally have priority, but if multiple bullets fly at you all at once, as is so often the case during boss encounters, you may only see the frontmost bullet without realizing that additional energy particles are following behind in rapid succession. This makes Space Harrier 3D an exercise in flying blind and hoping for the best at times, dodging what you can see and praying that what you can't see won't hurt you. This was a problem in the first Master System Space Harrier as well, but it feels more severe here, which is, ironic. The entire point of Space Harrier 3D was to mitigate the blockout effect of tiling through the use of the 3D glasses. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work. The 3D effect here comes through to a degree, but it doesn't present as well as, say, the visuals in Maze Hunter 3D or Missile Defense 3D. Convincing nature of the illusion aside, the real kicker here is that Space Harrier 3D's visual effect is tough to look at for more than a few minutes. I initially thought the fact that I ended up with an eye-strain headache after just a couple of levels of play spoke to some shameful weakness on my part, but no. A casual survey of online discussion about the game suggests that this result is actually quite common. I'm not 100% certain why this would be the case, but poring over the footage I've captured with my soggy, technically deficient brain, I suspect the problem comes down to Space Harrier 3D's reliance on that background tile setup I mentioned before. Sega's 3D glasses tech relies on strobing LCD shutters, which it syncs to alternating frames on the screen. The lenses darken to block the line of sight of each of the viewer's eyes 30 times per second, with one lens blackened while the other switches to transparent. The image on screen shifts rapidly back and forth between projecting one perspective to one eye and then the other, and the discrepancies in the position of the objects between these cycling viewpoints creates the illusion of depth and distance. The concept works marvelously with sprite-based objects, but it seems to have poor luck with the background tiles. I feel like the way the tile-based objects can't overlap, but instead are presented as objects surrounded by blank corners of solid background color doesn't really work well with the concept that objects are three-dimensional objects in space. A 3D effect appears here, but in a compromised way that your brain has trouble reconciling. Or maybe the issue stems from something else, but that's my observation anyway. Whatever the culprit, Space Harrier 3D doesn't manage to improve on its predecessor, and in fact feels downright painful to play. Perhaps knowing this, Sega did include the option to turn off the 3D effect, something that Maze Hunter 3D lacked. But Sega being Sega, that option doesn't show up on the menu screen. Oh no, you can only turn off the 3D effect by playing the game in 3D long enough to rank on the high score screen, and then inputting your name as a secret code. Maybe someday Sega will include quality of life features as a standard element of their home games, but for now, it's all cloak and dagger. Fittingly, for a game that cloaks your eyes and makes your skull feels like someone shoved a dagger through it. Next up for the Master System's parade of tepid follow-up attempts, we have the sophomore adventure of Alex Kidd. Wait, did I say sophomore? Sorry, I meant sophomoric. But wait, Alex Kidd the Lost Stars is so much worse as a sequel than Space Harrier 3D. For all of the previous game's failings, you can see that Sega really put some thought into using its add-on technology to help bridge the gap between console and coin-op. The 3D glasses ultimately work to Space Harrier 3D's detriment and undermine the whole affair, but at least some effort was made to build on its predecessor's foundation. The Lost Stars, on the other hand, feels like a massive step backward from Alex Kidd and Miracle World. That game certainly had its flaws, largely to do with its 1-2 punch of a hateful difficulty level and wonky control physics, but it had ambition. Miracle World contained secrets, complex level designs, hints of an economy, and fun vestiges of its origins as a Dragon Ball game. The Lost Stars might just be the single most pedestrian game we've seen to date on Master System, and that's saying a lot on a console boasting the lackluster light phaser lineup we've already seen. I will say this for the Lost Stars, at least it includes those vanishingly rare Sega quality of life features whose absence I've endlessly lamented, and they're not even hidden away as secrets. When you die in the Lost Stars, Alex has the option to continue from the beginning of the current stage. That's wild, at least for a Sega game. Even wilder is the fact that Alex has a life bar. A life bar! What is this, Zillion? Actually, it's more than just a life bar, it's also a timer and a stamina meter. That's right, it appears that Sega, realizing that Westone's Wonder Boy made a more compelling Master System mascot than Alex Kidd, adjusted Alex to be more like Wonder Boy. This translates into a simple, linear platform game in which Alex's stamina steadily ticks down over time, effectively serving double duty as a timer. It actually serves triple duty. This time around, Alex can endure more than a single hit from enemies without turning into an angel and floating off screen. Instead of dying upon contact, Alex instead emits an ear-piercing scream that undoubtedly haunted the dreams of an entire generation of young Sega fans. He also loses a chunk of health off of his health meter at the same time. I think that Lost Stars is the first time, chronologically speaking, we've seen a system like this in a game. Take a hit, lose time, eventually losing so much time that you can't possibly finish the stage and might as well give up. And that's probably why we haven't seen it. Nothing is more demoralizing than having to kill a little screaming kid in order to restart a level because his shared time and health meter haven't zeroed out but will still make it impossible to reach the end of the stage. The Lost Stars is weirdly lopsided in its difficulty, too. The first level is by far the most taxing in the entire game, with a tight time penalty made all the more punishing by the way the level is populated by hazards and scenery that slow you down. There are the dogs that sit in place and bark at you with slow-moving words, overhead tram lines that you can shimmy across but which slow you down, and a few other vexing nuisances. Once you clear that first level, though, the subsequent stages play out far more reasonably. For the most part, the game's 6 levels only get tough in their final moments, when you have to rush past a gauntlet of obstacles, projectiles, or enemies designed to force you to maneuver with pixel-perfect precision through the final screen. But here's the thing, The Lost Stars does not really do pixel-perfect precision. This might be the most visually striking game we've yet seen on Master System outside of the faux superscalar works. Alex and all the idiot monsters who populate his world are presented with giant, chunky sprites, loaded with impressive shading for an 8-bit game. The world around Alex totally pops with color and detail, and every stage has its own look and unique application of the Master System's hyper-saturated color palette. The downside is that Alex moves even more stiffly than in his first adventure, with diminished jump skills and a slower pace in general. The combination of sluggish action and humongous sprites means that dodging and weaving between hazards the way the game wants you to feels a lot more difficult than it should. You won't find the fluid elegance of a truly great platform action game here, allowing you to slip gracefully between threats with sheer finger chutzpah. Moving safely through the world of The Lost Stars comes down to careful pattern memorization and rigid, pixel-perfect execution. The game looks like Duplo, and it kind of plays like Duplo too. Simple, clunky, childish. It doesn't even retain Alex's trademark shell-core combat skills, which is to say a giant fist punching things. Instead, Alex spends most of the game defenseless, unless he can collect a limited power-up that lets him fire a few rippling wave projectiles at monsters. Although that power-up seems to be about 50-50 on which monsters it can actually destroy. There is an admirable element of surrealism to the game, as seen in the naked guys who fart skulls at you in the Halloween level, and the tiny trams that run along the cable line in Stage 1. But that's all window dressing, and comes off less like a meaningful act of expression and more like throwing random doodles into game code on a whim. And it ends up being only half a game, too. The Lost Stars want you to recover the 12 lost miracle treasures that represent the Zodiac.
Find the miracle ball.
And completing a stage nets you 1 treasure, like Opa Opa. However, there are only 6 levels here, so once you've found the first half of the treasures, you have to replay the stages all over again to net the other half. So far as I can tell, there's nothing new or different about these stages in the second loop. Alex Kidd The Lost Stars actually got its start as an arcade game that debuted almost simultaneously with the Mark III and Master System release of Alex Kidd in Miracle World. I can kind of see the game making sense in that context. A more limited linear action counterpart to the adventure-tinged Master System title, visually enhanced, albeit fairly unremarkable otherwise. As a home console release a year and a half later, though, it falls pretty flat. While I can respect Sega's impulse to bring its coin-op games home, maybe a game that showed up in arcades as a shallow equivalent to an ambitious console adventure would have been better off staying in arcades. Just a thought. Here we have follow-ups to 2 of the biggest titles for Master System. Sega's own promotional propaganda rag doesn't give either one a single inch of column space, which probably says everything you need to know about these 2 games. Next time on Segaiden, more sloppy seconds. Second entries, I mean.